over the last 10 years, actually on January 1st, 2013, I left the U.S. To embark on what I thought would be a 1-year trip to teach English in South Korea. And since that time, I've still been going strong, teaching abroad in South Korea, teaching in Poland. I did a global MBA program. I was a scuba dive instructor in Thailand. I started an online business, was in China for these trade fairs. And during these whole 10 years, I kept meeting interesting people from around the world who had these crazy stories, whether they were living on a small island in Thailand for the last 10, 15 years, or they just moved to China to start some kind of consulting business. And so meeting all these people, I thought this fascinating that they were doing these crazy things, embarking on different journeys, kind of throwing themselves out there into the world while, the traditional path here in the U.S. Was everyone just gets their 9 to 5, which is what I was doing for a while. And so I really wanted to share these stories with my podcast. And so one of the first things I see from people is there's kind of some inspiration. There's something that they really want to do, some kind of voice in the back of their head. Maybe they see a video online. Maybe they overhear someone talking about something cool, but there's a voice back of their head that say, hey, I really want to try this, or hey, I really want to see this, or hey, I really want to leave my comfort zone. And it's finally coming to terms with saying, okay, I'm going to go ahead and embark on this journey. But with that comes a massive amounts of fear. Because you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. Even in my own personal story, when I left for South Korea, I remember that what happened for me was I did it. I signed up to teach 6 months in advance, and I told my friends, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." And I was like, "Yeah, it's gonna be awesome." Gangnam Style just came out, and I was like, "Oh, it's gonna be so great to live in Korea." But a month before, I'm like, what am I doing? I know nothing about South Korea. I have no idea what the weather is like. I have no idea even where on the map where it is, which is kind of crazy to think about now. And I didn't know anything about it. And that's when panic struck. But I think it was because I had done it. One thing I have found, at least personally for me, is when I want to do something that kind of seems like a little bit, let's say, kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. If I book it in advance, 3, 6, 9 months in advance, then it doesn't become like I don't think about it so much, and then all of a sudden it happens, and I have to go through the motion. So I kind of commit myself to it in advance as a way to kind of get over that fear.
Is that kind of a tip that you would say to people that they should just put it in their damn calendar and just say, hey, dude, put it in?
Absolutely. Like for me, if I said, "Hey, I'm going to go teach in Korea in 2 weeks," I would freak out. I would never do it. I would say, "No way. I don't know anything about it." But since I put it off in my head 6 months in advance, it doesn't feel like it's going to happen. And then when it finally starts coming time to you have to start actually planning things out and seeing where things go. So that's kind of one strategy I use if there's things I want to do. Same with, for example, I started really getting into endurance races, marathons. Sign up for it. Like it's in 5-6 months. I just finished the Chicago Marathon this Sunday. And all of a sudden you're like, it's not so bad. Marathon will be fun. But on Sunday on mile 22, I was like, never again am I doing this ever again. So that's kind of one trick I use is to kind of just things that I really want to do. I'll write them down. And I'll just kind of put them in my calendar and kind of commit myself to it in advance. And then it'll kind of start coming up. So I have to plan for it. Strategy for go ahead.
Hold on, but a lot of people are procrastinators, and so is that strategy of let's say I want to do a marathon or I want to go to Tahiti in 6 months. I mean, a lot of people will postpone things until last minute, so that may not work for them. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing as well. I think the other thing I do, which I don't know if is a good idea or not, but I'll tell a lot of people about it. So I'll tell more friends, and the more people start, talking about it, asking me about it, because people get interested about it, then it becomes a thing. And then now there's like too much. It's like social suicide. If I tell everyone, hey, I'm going to go teach to South Korea on January 1st, and on January 2nd I'm still in Chicago, that is social suicide. I would hate to tell them like, no, I chickened out. So I think kind of realizing how your mind works and adding that pressure. I do the same thing with the marathon. When I sign up for it, I'll tell everyone about it. And then that adds pressure to me that kind of like, hey, this kind of keeps me accountable to make sure that I do what I was set out to do,
Were you able to do it under 5 hours?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
I was. I just got it right around 4 hours.
Oh,
But
awesome.
I think mile 22 to 26, I was just a floating ghost. I
You were
was just
walking?
like I was dead. No, I was. I was. I would call it the lightest jog possible, one foot after another.
Exactly. I think it was my first marathon I ran, and then I remember at mile 22 or something like that, a woman, I swear she was probably like 65, she started running past me.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
was like 30 years old. I was like, okay, this is humiliating.
Yeah, but the marathon is such a great experience. I was just here in Chicago. It's about 50,000 runners, and you had all the streets are just filled with people, and you go through all these cool neighborhoods. It's such a great energy, and it's one way I also have recently started to travel. Throughout the world, as well as using these endurance races. So last year, one of my favorite races I did was the Athens Authentic Marathon. And that race is from the city of Marathon, Greece, to Athens. And that was also a lot of fun. I actually dressed up as a Spartan warrior with the huge mask and the cape. And it's just a great way to experience the culture and get the vibe of the people. The people are all out there cheering you on. I got a chance to go visit the Parthenon and do all the things in Athens the day before. So it's a really cool way to kind of give some purpose behind your travels when you start doing these 5, 10Ks, half marathons in different cities. I think it's a phenomenal way to travel and see the world.
So I interrupted you. You were going to say, make a second point. I don't know if you still remember it.
Yeah, the second one, because I think fear is the biggest thing that's holding people back, and I see this with friends here. I'm actually just back in Chicago, and they have never left, and they always ask me, they're always so interested in what I did, and I just know the difference between me and them was that I was able to push past that fear and kind of throw myself in the deep end. But the second thing is like fear setting, right? So I remember when I was leaving for Korea, it's another thing I did as well, was I kind of told myself, what's the worst thing that can happen, And the worst thing that could have happened is I went to Korea. The Koreans hate me. They despise me. They throw tomatoes at me. The food sucks. It's cold. It's miserable. And then worst thing happens in 1 week, I go home and say, well, that was clearly not a good idea. Nothing happens. But usually what ends up happening is people realize, wow, that, there was some reason why I wanted to do this, and it ends up being 10x as great as you thought it would be. Korea for me was such a phenomenal experience to try a whole new cuisine. The culture, I just loved how collective it was, just going to order food. For me, it was just so cool that, when we go out to eat, we don't just say, hey, I want a Big Mac and I have fries, and it just comes from me. We order as a group and we eat together. And I really love the community aspect of South Korea.
How long were you there total?
I was there 3.5 years.
Okay, wow. So then tell us something about South Korean culture that was not entirely obvious when you first moved there, that it took you maybe months to learn.
That wasn't obvious.
So for example, one thing is, this collective ordering at a restaurant. That's one thing that's kind of interesting. That, it's not like we look at, I want this, you want that, like you order as a team. So that's one interesting thing. But could you have seen, I don't know what year you were there, but like all of a sudden K-pop just has taken off, and all sorts of other South Korean, mega hits that they've really dominated the culture recently. Could you see that coming, and why is it taking off, for example?
That's a great question. When I was there, I talked about this with other people that you can feel the energy there. And at that time, still no one really knew about Korea. K-pop wasn't a thing. K-beauty wasn't a thing. Korean movies like Parasite weren't a thing. Like Korea really wasn't on the map other than Gangnam Style with Psy. And Samsung and LG, yeah, and all these things. But still, people would, I think if you ask the typical American, they probably wouldn't even know that Samsung or Hyundai are Korean. They're just like, oh, it's somewhere Asian. But from my understanding is the Korean government had put aside a percentage of their GDP to invest in Korean products as a cultural export. So because Korea is landlocked, they don't have a lot of resources. They put a lot of money into their education, and then they also wanted to start.
South Korea is not landlocked.
Sorry, not landlocked. I apologize. A peninsula. Sorry, I apologize.
Okay, yeah.
It's a peninsula. They don't have a lot of resources.
You told me that you didn't know where it was, so I was just trying to confirm that.
Was I even there? Was I even there? It's between Kyrgyzstan and China, right?
Right. Yeah, and you were saying to yourself, like, this water all around me, it must be fake.
Yeah. They're so good at that. But from what I understood is that they put a lot of their money into wanting to invest in Korea and Korean culture as an export product. So what happened in the last 10 years is K-pop became super popular. I mean, people all around the world, I mean, middle schoolers, everyone listens to BTS and all these different bands. Back then, like there was just K-pop was just popular in Korea. It was like people would laugh at K-pop, and now it's like a thing. K-beauty, the beauty scene in Korea is really, really important. They have a lot of plastic surgery, but their cosmetics are really, really good. And that's like in so many different pharmacies and beauty shops around the world. We have, of course, Korean movies, Parasite, and all these different movies that have become popular. Korean TV series. What was that? That was the one that was super, not Death Squad. What's it called? Oh
Squid?
my gosh.
No.
Squid Games, that's it. My gosh, it's so cool to watch just to see Korea in the background. And it's kind of cool how this small country, I mean, Korea is pretty small, has become such a huge influence throughout the entire world.
I was listening to
So,
this other, I was reading an article about how the demographics of Korea is really going to shrink because they have 1.2 children per female, the fertility rate. And China's even less than that, something like that. And so I just wonder, like, here they are, K-pop, it's the youth that's driving a lot of this revolution, but their youth
mhm.
is going to disappear or vanish. I mean, not completely obviously, but it's going to be much smaller. I wonder if they're going to be able to sustain that level of creativity when they are going to have half as many young people in just a generation.
Yeah, the birth rate is really, really low in Korea and Japan, and I think it has a lot to do with the living situation in Korea. I mean, people are working really, really hard over there. Education is really expensive. One of the things they value a lot in Korea is education. So these parents put all this money into private education for the kids. They're just working all day long. And so the people, young kids, they start thinking about having children. They're like, well, why would I want to put myself into a situation where, I have to work all the time for these kids? And so that's one factor. I think another factor is that people worry about their careers, especially women who are in the business industry that, there's like employers that are asking, when you plan to have children, do you have a boyfriend, something like that, which isn't very common in the US. I think it's actually illegal. But there I was working with business students who told me that's a question that they face. But to also answer your question you asked earlier, one thing I learned that I didn't understand was how hard they worked. I remember getting there, and I would ride the subways, and people would just kind of look like lifeless in their eyes coming home at 10 o'clock because I'd be working pretty late as well. Students that were 11, 12 years old in my class were falling asleep, and I was like, why are they sleeping? Like, it's so, at first I was like, oh, it's disrespectful. You shouldn't be sleeping in class. And I realized they're just studying all night. They go, these students go to school from like 8 to 4 or 8 to 3:30. Then they go to their private school. So it's called the Hagwon. So from 4 to 7, they go to their first Hagwon. So they're learning stuff for next year. So they're learning math for next year, science for next year, or they're learning English, Japanese, or guitar or whatever. Then from 7 to 10, they go to their second one. And then they come home. They have homework from their normal school, from their private academies that they're doing till late at night. And then in the morning, they go back to school, do it again. So I think seeing how hard they work was to me probably one of the biggest kind of eye openers. And what happens when you live in an environment, you end up kind of adapting to it as well. I remember I was working like 2 or 3 jobs. It was when I was in Korea, just constantly just teaching, constantly working and doing different side gigs. And yeah, it's crazy how that kind of your environment influences you, and you end up just being like just like work everyone else. So.
Yeah, I mean, Ghana should be listening to this very carefully because in 1950s, Ghana's GDP per capita was equal to South Korea. And
Mhm.
today, South Korea is 8 or 9 times greater on a GDP per capita than Ghana. I mean, they just totally blew them away. And why? Look at what you just described. You just gave the
Mhm.
answer. I mean, they're just working their asses off far more than
Mhm.
any other country probably. And
Yeah.
they're reaping the benefits of that investment in their brains and in their infrastructure and everything they've done. Of course, there's probably a price to pay for all that stuff. Now, tell me this: is there a sexist society? Does it still exist there that women are pretty much subservient to men still, or is that changing?
You know what? I haven't been there in a while. I haven't been there in almost 7 years, but I used to work with business students, and hearing about some of the practices they have, like for example, putting pictures on, your resume. How managers are kind of hiring. Workers based on their looks. I was dating actually a girl who was trying to be. This is actually kind of interesting. At the time, I was dating this girl, and she told me that at the time in Korea, the hottest job for a female was to be a flight attendant. Like they really, really wanted it to be it. And so she went to this flight attendant like private academy, and they would tell her like change your hair color a little bit darker brown. Now change it black, and they just kind of kept like this appearance thing. It must be really difficult for them based on how they look to get a job. The other thing I was talking about earlier was I had a couple of business students as well who told me, when they're looking for jobs, the employers are asking, do you have a boyfriend? Are you going to do you plan to have children anytime soon? So, those are kind of policies that seem a little bit unfair compared to males. But it does seem when I was there that it was kind of more of a male dominated society, at least in the traditional sense. The younger kids, they had a chance to kind of go study abroad, just go see the world. But the traditional sense was kind of a strong male dominated society.
What was different dating a Korean woman versus, let's say, an American, for example?
The story is actually funny. I met this girl while I was hiking. We both got lost, and next thing I knew, we were kind of hanging out. And I invited her to this wedding. Had a couple, maybe too many drinks that night. And she's like, "Do you want to be my boyfriend?" I was like, "Of course I want to be your boyfriend. That sounds fantastic." She's like, "You're not going to forget about it?" I'm like, "Of course I'm not going to." And the next morning, she messaged me. She's like, "Good morning, boyfriend. I hope you didn't forget." So I was like, "Whoa, that was quick." But I think the difference was Korea society, at least when I was there, was very couple oriented. So it's like when you go to the movie theater, they have like popcorn sets for couples. When you go to the baseball game, you go in couples. You wear the same outfit. Like it's such a couple oriented society. I wouldn't. Yeah, it's kind of like if you're by yourself, like something kind of like off. You're always everything's based on being together and being in couples, and so they really like to spend time together. I would say it's more intense than kind of the independence and freedom that we have in the U.S. of kind of having like your own space compared to them.
Does that break down once they get married, or do they stay very tight couples?
I think it stays. At least the friends that I know that they have is they definitely still spend a lot of time together. Yeah, it's a little bit different. I think they lose the honeymoon phase where they're excited to see each other, but still.
I don't know how they do it when they're all working so hard.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe they're kind of all at work during the daytime.